We the peoples. Just think about those words for a second. It's one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, idealistic openings ever written. Born from the absolute devastation of World War II, the United Nations Charter wasn't just some dry legal document. It was a promise to try and build a completely new kind of world, one based on peace, on dignity, and on working together.
Okay, but let's be real. After more than 3/4 of a century, a timeline filled with some incredible successes and, yeah, some absolutely heartbreaking failures, the big question is still hanging in the air. Has this incredibly ambitious project actually lived up to that grand promise? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into today.
So here's our game plan. We're going to trace the entire biography of the UN. We'll start with its birth out of a previous failure, then look at the nuts and bolts of how it works. We'll cover its trial by fire during the Cold War, explore its often unseen work in making the world more humane, and finally tackle the huge challenges it's facing right now and the massive debate about its future.
All right, first stop. From failure, a new hope. Because here's the thing. You can't really get the UN until you understand the spectacular flame-out of the organization that came before it, the League of Nations.
So the UN's architects, they basically had a perfect checklist of what not to do. The old League of Nations, it was crippled. I mean, major countries like the US never even joined. Any single member could veto a decision which led to total paralysis, and it had no teeth, no army, just, well, hoping moral pressure would work. The UN was specifically designed to fix all of that. Get everybody in the room, give the big powers a council that could actually make a binding decision, and, this is key, give it the power to authorize sanctions and military force.
And what's wild is how fast this all happened, right in the middle of World War II. The name itself, United Nations, was coined by Franklin D. Roosevelt back in '42. By '44, they'd sketched out the basic structure. Then, at Yalta in early '45 came the most controversial part, the veto power for the big guys. Just a few months after that, 50 countries met in San Francisco to sign the charter, and by October 24th, it was official. The United Nations was a reality.
So what's at the very core of the UN? What's its DNA, really? Well, it all boils down to these 4 pillars, straight from Article 1 of its charter. Keep the peace, build friendly relationships, be the place where the world comes together to solve global problems, and act as a kind of stage where everyone can get on the same page.
Okay, so you've got these huge, ambitious goals, but how do you actually build a machine to achieve them? Let's pop the hood and look at the actual machinery of the UN system, those 6 main bodies set up by the Charter.
The UN's engine is built around these 6 main parts. First, you have the General Assembly. Think of it as a parliament of nations where every country gets 1 vote. Then you've got the real powerhouse, the Security Council. Their decisions on peace and security are legally binding on everyone. You've also got ICCCPR, which handles all the economic and social stuff, the World Court for legal fights between states, and the Secretariat. That's the UN's day-to-day staff led by the Secretary General. And last, the Trusteeship Council, which actually did its job so well overseeing former colonies that it worked itself out of a job and is now inactive. Mission accomplished there.
But here's the thing. The ink on that charter was barely dry when the world was plunged into a totally new kind of conflict, the Cold War. This was the UN's trial by fire, the period where all those high-minded ideals slammed right into the brutal reality of superpower politics.
And right at the heart of that clash, just one tiny, all-powerful word: no. The veto. This was the price the great powers demanded to even join the club. It was a safety switch to make sure the UN could never act against them. But it very quickly became the Cold War's favorite weapon.
And just like that, the Security Council turned into this ideological boxing ring. For the first few decades, the Soviet Union slammed down the veto over 100 times, blocking pretty much anything led by the West. Then, later on, as the UN's membership changed with all the new post-colonial countries, the tables turned, and the US started using its veto most often. The end result? Total paralysis. The UN's most powerful body was often completely gridlocked on the world's biggest crises.
But you know, sometimes gridlock forces you to be creative. And that paralysis, it actually led to one of the UN's biggest, most important inventions, peacekeeping. Now, if you look through the charter, you won't find it anywhere. It was famously called an idea from Chapter 6.5, a brilliant improvisation that had to be invented on the fly during the Suez Crisis in 1956. When Britain and France used their vetoes, the General Assembly stepped up, creating the first-ever armed UN force to supervise a ceasefire. It was a brand new bridge between just talking and all-out war.
And this whole idea of peacekeeping, it wasn't static. It had to evolve big time. It started out as traditional peacekeeping, blue helmets monitoring a ceasefire line between two countries that agreed to it. But then conflicts changed, becoming these messy civil wars. So peacekeeping had to become multidimensional, doing everything from disarming fighters to running elections. And after some really tragic failures, it had to evolve again into what's called robust peacekeeping, where troops are actually authorized to use force to protect civilians.
And if you look back, this whole journey has created a legacy of, well, just staggering extremes. On the one hand, you have these incredible successes. UN peacekeepers were absolutely crucial in guiding Namibia to independence, ending El Salvador's horrible civil war, and putting Cambodia on the path to peace. But then, on the other hand, you have these profound, soul-crushing failures. The helplessness during the Rwandan genocide, the massacre at the UN safe area of Srebrenica, and the disastrous mission in Somalia.
Just let that number sink in for a moment. Over 8,000. That's how many Bosnian Muslim men and boys were systematically murdered in Srebrenica, a town the UN had specifically declared a safe area. The peacekeepers there were lightly armed and were just completely overrun. They couldn't stop the slaughter. It remains one of the absolute darkest moments in the UN's history, and a devastating reminder of the human price when the world's will and resources just aren't enough. But even with these incredible challenges, some countries have just been rocks. India, for example, is an absolute giant in peacekeeping. It has consistently been one of the top contributors of troops since the very beginning. We're talking more than 200,000 Indian personnel who have served under the blue helmet. That is a massive, enduring commitment to the idea of global security.
So, while all this superpower drama was going on, a quiet revolution was happening inside the UN itself: decolonization. Just think, in its first 25 years, the UN's membership more than doubled as dozens and dozens of new countries, especially in Africa and Asia, won their independence. This completely changed the organization. It shifted the whole political center of gravity and pushed the concerns of the developing world, the global south, right to the top of the agenda.
It's easy to think the UN is all about war and peace and Security Council debates, but that's not even half the story. So much of its most important work happens far away from the spotlight. So let's turn to that, the massive, often invisible effort to build a better, more humane world through development and human rights.
I mean, the sheer scale of what the UN family does is mind-boggling. Let's just run through some numbers. The World Health Organization has helped cut polio cases by 99.9%. UNICEF vaccinates 45%, almost half of all the world's children. The World Food Program fed 158 million people in just 1 year. This is the other UN, this huge network of agencies doing quiet, life-saving work day in and day out.
And holding all of this work together, what's the big idea? It's right there in this foundational quote. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948 is basically the UN's moral compass. Now, it's not a legally binding treaty, but it has become the global benchmark for human dignity and the absolute foundation for modern international human rights law. It's inspired countless treaties and national constitutions all over the planet. Okay, so that brings us right up to today. And the world we live in now is a completely different planet from the world of 1945. The UN now finds itself facing a whole new set of complex, tangled threats that its founders really could never have dreamed of.
I mean, the threats we're facing now, they're global. They don't care about borders. We're seeing more complicated, dragged-out civil wars, the rise of global terror networks, a climate crisis that is speeding up, and a staggering 110 million people who have been forced to flee their homes. It all raises a really urgent question. Is an institution that was designed for the world of 1945 even equipped to handle the threats of today?
And that question, that's what's driving the final part of our story today, the urgent, and let's be honest, really contentious debate about how to reform the United Nations to make sure you can actually stay relevant in this new era.
So that's really what it all boils down to, isn't it? Is the UN an indispensable relic of 1945 with a Security Council that looks nothing like the world we live in today? Or is it still our best and maybe our only real hope for global cooperation? What a journey, right? It was born out of this incredible idealism, was immediately tested by the Cold War, and it's been responsible for unbelievable progress in human health and dignity. But today it's facing a real crisis of relevance.
Its entire future really depends on whether the nations of the world can find the political will to reshape it for the challenges of this century. To dive even deeper into the UN structure and the really heated debates about its future, make sure you head over to our website. We put together detailed notes and a quick revision mind map for this entire explainer, just for you. The link is right there in the description below.